same kvias like this year, where Chamish Asar B'Shvat comes out on a Monday in Tafshin Lamed Hey, that is 51 years ago. The 15th of Shvat came out on Monday, and the Rebbe said a Maimer Monday evening, which is like about now. There are 4 times of the year that are called the head of the year. Very strange. Only in Yiddishkeit we have 4 Rosh Hashanahs. It's a Mishnah, give him Seches Rosh Hashanah. Be'echad b'Nissen, Arish Chodesh Nissen, Rosh Hashanah, L'mlachim, V'regolim. It's Rosh Hashanah when Jewish kings would start counting their year. It said the first year to the reign of so-and-so, the second year to the reign of so-and-so. The year began from Nissen, and also for Yom Tovim, it began. Nissen is the first month of the Yom Tovim, like we said in Rishon Hu Lachem L'Chad Hashanah. Pesach is the first, Shavuos the second, Sukkot is the third, Messiah, and then the Mishnah goes through other Rosh Hashanahs for other things, and the conclusion of the Mishnah, because it's like going through the cycle of the year, it speaks about certain Rosh Hashanahs in El, and Rosh Hashanah, what we call Rosh Hashanah in Tishrei, and then he concludes, Be'echad b'Shvat, on the first day of Shvat, Rosh Chodesh Shvat is Rosh Hashanah Le'ilon, is the head of the year for the trees. Kedivri Beishamai, that's the opinion of Beishamai. Beisil Laimrim, we follow the ruling of Beisil, who say, B'chamish Asur Bay, in the 15th of Shvat. Since all the 4 Rosh Hashanah were enumerated in the very same Mishnah, I mean, Mishnayos is often doesn't necessarily aggregate everything in one place. It could sometimes be one Mishnah will talk about one type of Rosh Hashanah, a different Mishnah, after a few pages of Gemara, it will talk about a different type of Rosh Hashanah, etc., etc. In this case, the Machaber, the Mishnayos, Rabbi Yehuda Anasi, decided to collect in one Mishnah all the various different Rosh Hashanahs. So the very fact that the Rebbe decided to bring them all into the same Mishnah, Hari movements, it's understood, Sheyesh Shaykh has been named, that there is a connection between all the 4 Rosh Hashanahs. Ubefrat, this is especially so, Shekulam Nikraim B'Shem Rosh Hashanah, all of them are called by the same name, the head of the year. Especially since the term is the head, as we're soon going to explain the significance of being called the head. Okay, as it's known, Shenikra Rosh Hashanah, V'Leitchil Hashanah, it's called the head of the year, not the beginning of the year, etc. Like it's explained in the Torah of the Alter Rebbe on his Rosh Hashanah Mamorim, and also in the Sefer called Ateres Rosh from the Middle Rebbe, that he speaks about the different Mamorim dealing with Tishrei, and speaks a lot about the significance of Rosh Hashanah being the head of the year, then not the beginning of the year. Why is it called that way? Since it's similar to the head that's in the body of a person. Is that the life force and vitality of all the limbs are included in the head. Even when the life force and vitality comes out to every limb individually. So now you would think, okay, once the flow of life energy came out of the head into the rest of the body, so then maybe it's like divorced from the head. So we say, no, the head still runs the entire body. So too it's in the days in the Jewish calendar that are called a head. For example, Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year, or Rosh Chodesh, or the head of the month, etc. What is the idea that they're called the head? Initially, all the days are included in that day, whether it's all the days of the month or all the days of the year. And afterwards, when all the details came out individually into their place, just like the life force of the entire body came out into its individual place, they are directed by their head. Since there is one common denominator, one common point between all the 4 heads of the years that are enumerated in that Mishnah, Masechtas Rosh Hashanah. Therefore, it's understood that also content-wise, the idea of these different Rosh Hashanahs are not completely disparate and have no connection one with the other, but there is an association between them. Especially, it's connected. The beginning of the Mishnah, where he says the first of Nisan is the head of the year for kings and for Yom Tovim. It's connected with the end of the Mishnah that on the 15th of the month of Shvat is Rosh Hashanah for the trees. Al pi haklal, according to the rule, should not seifim b'tchilasim b'seifim, that the end is staked out in the beginning. The beginning is staked out in the end. The Rebbe asks, we need to understand what's the connection between the Rosh Hashanah for kings and the Rosh Hashanah for trees. The second paragraph, we could explain this. According to what's explained in the Marmar of Tzemach Tzedek on the Parsha Mishpatim, ala Pasik, it says over there on Parsha Mishpatim, Shalish regolim tachik li bashana, that 3 regolim, pilgrimage festivals, should you celebrate for me during the year. Maybe Shom Divrei B'chai upon the office that the Tzemach Tzedek brings the words of the commentary known as the B'chai in the commentary upon the office. The Gam HaRegolim Heimoyedim Ala Tvua. Also, the pilgrimage festivals, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, are Yomim Tovim that are associated with the crops, with grain. Zman Aviv, the spring, Uktzir Soidim, it's the harvest of barley. That's why we bring the Omer offering from the barley on the 2nd day of Pesach. By doing so, we are allowed to eat from the new barley grain. V'chaga kotzir chitzim, or new grain in general. V'chaga kotzir and Shavuos is known also as the Yom Tov of harvest, which is referring to the main harvest, ktzir chitzim, the wheat harvest. V'chaga sukkos uzmana osif. V'chaga sukkos, another name and title for the Yom Tov of Sukkot is called the time of gathering, because that's when after we take out, we harvest everything and we leave it in the field to dry. Afterwards, in Sukkot's time, is when we gather it in from the field and bring it inside. What's the association? Why are Yom Tovim connected with times having to do with crops and grain? So what's the connection both with Hashem's Yom Tovim and the Jewish people? Tuvim Mashakosov Kodesh Yisrael Hashem Bereishis to also. This will be understood from what it says in the pasuk that the Yidden are holy to Hashem. They are the first of His crop. Yisrael Nikru Tvus Hashem, that the Yidden are called Hashem's crop or Hashem's grain. V'chsiv, and it says Uzrati Hali Ba'aretz, I will plant her for me in the earth. That Hashem says this about the Jewish people. Amar Azal, the Chazal say, Klum Odom Zereh Kur, does a person not plant a kur? Ella, top of the next page, Lahachnis, Kama Kurim, only to bring in many Kurim. Kurim is a certain dry measure. So a person plants a kur of wheat and kernels and grain to be able to receive a gain of multiple kurim. Just like when planting any crop and grains. Through sowing 1 kernel of wheat or 1 kernel of barley. Through that it grows many, many times more than that 1 kernel. In a similar vein, it's concerning the Jewish people. In general, concerning the Jewish people. And especially every single man and woman amongst the Yidden specifically. That Hashem sowed them and planted them in the earth. What's it mean that Hashem planted us in the earth? That's the descent of the neshama down below from a high building to a deep pit. And what's the purpose? Just like in general, when we plant a seed in the ground, it's for the sake of the growth. that will come through that planting in an infinite, a huge amount to no end, in comparison to what was before the descent. Though there's a difference between sowing to planting trees, when we plant grain, even the seed that we plant, it's a kernel of wheat, it's a kernel of barley, etc. That kernel has flavor to it. You could eat it. That's how you actually make flour. You take these kernels of wheat or these kernels of barley and you cook it, you bake it, you grind it, etc., etc. As opposed to when one plants trees, the seed that is planted ain't by shum tam, it has no flavor to it. What are the seeds used for a fruit tree? It's the seeds in the fruit. That's the part that we don't eat. It has no taste to it. If anything, it tastes bitter. We eat the fruit. We throw away the seed unless we use it for planting. What does this show us? That the growth in the tree, what grows on a tree, it gives forth fruit that come about in a completely different quality than the seed that has been planted. When we're talking about the planting of a kernel of wheat, so it didn't change. You planted kernels of wheat, you get kernels of wheat, and you eat the kernels of wheat, and the kernel of wheat that you planted could have been eaten. But when you're planting fruit trees, the seeds are inedible, and you're planting seeds to get edible fruit. So that's a change that is not just of multiples, that from one seed you're getting many kernels of wheat, but you're getting something of a different quality completely. So, Kvishi is bar l'kamen, like later on in the Maimer, the Rebbe is going to elaborate on this. Still in all, there is a similarity of this when sowing grain, because the sprouting forth of the grain is not from the actual kernel of wheat or the actual kernel of barley that was planted in the ground, because that is completely comes apart in the ground. Through the seed rotting away and becoming totally lost, it becomes now completely nullified to the power of growth that's embedded in the earth itself. This awakens and arouses the power of growth that's in the land and the earth, to give forth and to make grow multiple stalks of wheat and barley. So therefore, it's also a matter of a qualitative change, not just a quantitative thing, that one kernel of wheat gave out multiple kernels of wheat, because that kernel disappeared. Since that kernel disappeared, so it's really nothing is coming into multiple kernels. So we say, V'hainu, ki af shebegilui begoli hinai sof hanasai de'atzmicha yirak b'teisefes bekamus, though the increase of the growth by the kernels of wheat or kernels of barley is only an increase. That seems to be a quantity increase, but in truth, based on the fact that it's rotting away completely in the ground, it becomes a completely new being in a completely new quality because it's totally gone. So too, that we said that every single Yid is like a seed that's planted in the ground by Hashem, so too it's in every single Jewish man and woman. This descent of the neshama from a high building to a deep pit, for the sake of the ascent. Behind this means Eretz Chayfetz, it says that the Jewish people are a land that Hashem desired. It's a land that He wants. Shari al Kol b'nei Yisrael ne'amar ki tiyu atem Eretz Chayfetz. Concerning all the Jewish people, it says that you will be a land of desire. Like it's known, the teaching of Baal Shem Tov, and my father and the Frierdiker Rebbe brings this many places and many times. This is Hayom Yom. Every single Jew is like a desired land. Just like in a desired land is found all precious and all wealth, and all types of precious stones. So too, it's in every single yid that they are considered a land of desire, because there are many, many hidden and concealed treasures in every single yid. So how come do we see differences in Yidden? So actually, yes, but there's a difference in the avodah. How to extract it from its concealed way to its revealed way by every single yid. By some people, the treasure is more concealed. By others, it's closer to the surface and doesn't take much work to reveal it. The growth that happens by a yid comes about through sowing and planting in the earth. And we said before, what happens to the seed? Specifically when it rots away. It's specifically when it's in the way of bittul and accepting the yoke of heaven. It's the beginning of the avodah and its primary thing and its root. And from the bittul and Kabbalah oil, which the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, Kabbalah oil, which is the fear of Hashem, is the primary avodah, the beginning of the avodah, etc. That's how you have, through the bittul, through the rotting away, the complete dissolution of the seed, the person becomes totally bottled. Now he can become the first of his crop. Through that sprouts forth and grows a great amount, not just quantitatively, like we said, from one kernel of wheat is many kernels, but also qualitatively. Just like it's an idea of the crops. That says about it, of those that plant with tears, they will harvest with song. They go and cry, the one that carries the sack of seeds, but he comes with song carrying his bundles. In other words, the planting is done with tears and the harvest is done with song. Through initially there's the idea of crying, which is the idea of bittul, like we spoke about before, that the seed going into the ground and dissolving in the ground, rotting away in the ground, shows on bittul. So then, that's the idea of planting with tears. That he goes on and cries, the one that's carrying the sack of seeds. Through that leads to that they will harvest with song. He will come with song, carrying his bundles of wheat. In a similar vein, concern is the avodah of the Jewish people. Through their bittul and their sowing in the ground, comes about from this the joy in the time of the growth and the revelation. Top of the next page. That's why all the three Yom Tovim, which have to do with the harvest and have to do with the gathering into the home, they are Yom Tovim of joy, because that's just like we said in the Pasuk in Tehillim, by planting in a state of bittul, so the harvest is in a joyous state. Both the planting and the harvest are both, the planting has to be in a state of bittul, and the harvest is the way of simcha, are both hinted in the Yom Tovim, in the Shalosh Regalim. Shari regolim ugam lashon regel. Regolim is also from the expression of regel. The Rebbe in the brackets brings that the regel, meaning the foot, is because al pi halachim, only someone that can walk by foot to Yerushalayim is obligated to appear in the Beis Hamikdash for these 3 pilgrimage festivals. Literally, they have to be able to walk by foot. So regolim, Yomim Tovim, doesn't just mean regolim times. We also know regel means every single time, but regolim means from the word foot. So let's skip over the brackets, 4 lines down. Shemoira ala avoida ubitl kabal soil. The idea of a foot, that's the avoida of bitl of kabal soil. The foot just follows orders. It's not the brain. It's not about thinking and evaluating and so on. On the other hand, even though they are regolim, they are about the feet, they are considered Yom Tovim for joy. That joy is higher, not just higher than the foot, but it's even higher than the head. How do we see this? That's why joy breaks through barriers. Because joy is beyond understanding and comprehension. Understanding and comprehension puts everything in a box, which means that things are limited. Joy breaks out of the box. Simcha poiritz together. So that's why simcha is even higher than understanding. So therefore, we find that the idea of a regel, that is something that reaches to the level of simcha. It's hinted in this, the avoid of bittul, of the level of planting b'chinas regel. The first thing, hazoid and bedima, the idea of planting, the idea of bittul, and the extra ascent that happens in the growth. That's why it's moedim l'simcha, it's Yom Tovim for joy and celebration. So this was all the idea of Rosh Hashanah, of regolim. Now we said another thing, the beginning of the Mishnah starts with Rosh Hashanah l'mlachim. Just like when it comes to the idea of the Rosh Hashanah for the Yom Tovim, that we say the beginning of Nisan, the first of Nisan is also the Rosh Hashanah for kings. Kings represent the sphere of Malchus, kingship, that lasted the 10 spheres. When we speak about that, we count the years of a king from Rosh Chodesh Nisan. It's talking about Jewish kings. What's the significance? Why does Jewish kings have to do with this topic? Concerning a Jewish king, the Chazal said, when a king bows down in Shemoneh Esrei, so by us, when we bow down, we raise our head back up again, we straighten up, and then we bow down the next part. But a king has to demonstrate an even higher level of bittul than an ordinary Jew, and therefore, when he bows down, he remains bowed down for the rest of Shemoneh Esrei, for the rest of the Amidah. Because the idea of a king is the ultimate perfection of sublimation to Hashem. That is the entire purpose of the king. To draw down every single Jewish person, that they should be nullified to the King of Kings Hashem. Therefore, the Chazal had were the darshan to move about the Torah Rav Magi. That's brought down the Torah of Mizrach Magi. Is same to us Malach and Malach. He should surely place upon you a king. Shetehei emosei alecha. That his fear and the awe of the king should be upon you. What does it mean? Because the bittul to the king transmits itself and makes that the Yid should have a bittul to Hashem. Kirachai de bittul kolam lamelech, only through the bittul of the entire nation to the king. Nim shachem ha-bittul melech, malcham lochim, comes down to them the bittul. To the King of Kings, habitl shal melech u'malch shamayim, the bittul of the king to the kingdom of heaven. In a similar vein, Spheres HaMalchus is also, of all the spheres, it is the most expressive to the idea of bittul. In a part of the Zohar called Sifrat Tznius, it says Malchus, which is called the ground, the lowest level, is a level of bittul. Even the sphere of Malchus, which is in the world of Toyu, even though that in the world of Toyu we know that it's every sphere was in full force and in a very powerful way, but Malchus, even in the world of Toyu, was in a state of bittul. Malchus of Behepech Mekal spheres, Malchus, the opposite of all the spheres in Toyu, she'etzlam hoya in the vayimlech. By the spheres of Toyu, they were each like a king and with full force, and that caused the breaking of the vessels for those that are into the Kabbalah of the world of Toyu. Mash enkim ba'ar, as opposed to the ground. Showing the spheres of Malchus is batolas. It's a level of bittul even in the world of Toyu. Like it's explained at length in Kabbalah. How much more so in the world that's already repaired, meaning the world of Atzilus. The idea of the world of Tikkun, the world of Atzilus, is everything is prepared and ready and complete and perfect. The sphere of Malchus, the sphere of Malchus is in the ultimate state of bittul. So therefore, Rosh Hashanah has to do with bittul. Rosh Hashanah, the Shalosh Regalim have to do with bittul because the having to do with the grain that's planted in the ground, and therefore, and it also has to do with the foot. That's the idea of bittul. So the last paragraph on this page, though all the three regalim are Yom Tovim that are associated with the crops, like we said before, Mekal Makom still in all. There's an interesting difference between the Yom Tov of Pesach and Yom Tov of Shavuos versus the Yom Tov of Sukkot. This is Chag Pesach was mana of Ivuksir Soidim, Shavuos Ksir Chitim. Chag Pesach, which is in the spring, that's the harvest of the barley. Shavuos is the harvest of the wheat. Chag Sukkot choose mana osif, and the Yom Tov of Sukkot where the time of gathering the items down in the field into the home. It's not just gathering your grain, but also the idea of having not just with your silos and so on, but also having to do with your wine. The wine is the grapes having to do with the tree. According to what we said before, the fact that the Yom Tovim are times of joy, is associated with, and it's connected with them being the Yom Tovim, having to do with the crops, that it's the growth that follows after the planting, how they move, and so it's understood. The fact that only the Yom Tov of Sukkot is called the time of our Simcha, though we said before that all the three Yom Tovim are called Moedim LaSimcha, still in all, of the three Yom Tovim, Pesach is called Zman Chereseinu, the time of our freedom. Yom Tov Shavuos is called Zman Matan Tereseinu, the time of giving the Torah. Sukkot is called Zman Simchaseinu because on Sukkot there's a special Simcha greater than Pesach and Shavuos. Why is there a greater Simcha on Sukkot than on Pesach and Shavuos? Even though all of them have to do with the growth that follow the planting, etc., which should bring joy. Because then it's not just the gathering of the crops, of the grain, but it's also of the wine, of the fruits. What's the significance? So now he's going to get into what we mentioned earlier, that the Rebbe was going to point out the specialness and the uniqueness of fruit growth, the planting of fruit and the growth of fruit, versus the planting and the growth of grain. So he says in the second line for the top, the explanation of this, it's like it's explained, look the Torah by Hefresh bein Zriya B'Tvual and Natir B'Ilon, is that the difference between planting of grain to planting of trees, if you want to have the exact English words, I think it's sowing grain versus planting of trees. When you're sowing grain, like for example, we gave before the example of a kernel of wheat, so you're going to have from that kernel of wheat, like it, the same type of kernels, but except instead of you put in just one kernel, you're going to have a lot of kernels come out from that one kernel of wheat. Another thing, what happens when you plant grain, you also doesn't take such a long delay from when you sow the grain to the when it sprouts. But you will need a lot more work, like in the Mishnah, it enumerates there's 39 prohibited labors on Shabbos. A great amount of those 39 prohibited labors have to do with what we need to be able to make bread, the Mishnah says. There has to be lachresh, you have to sow, and you have to plow, and you have to sow, dosh, and you have to thresh it, and boiler, and you have to choose out, you have to bake, you have to cook, until it's ready to be eaten. The Rebbe skipped over a lot of more things that you have to go through till you can make a kernel of wheat edible. On the other hand, when you're planting a seed of an apple, the tree of the apple will grow, and you'll have the apple on top of the tree. So in other words, it's not like the grain, a kernel of wheat that you're giving mainly wheat, but you're having a whole tree and an apple on top of the tree grow from it. And there could be a very great delay between the planting of the seed of a tree, of a fruit tree, till when the fruit grows on the tree. There's even such fruit trees that it can delay 70 years. Like, for example, a date palm, like it said, Tzadik Hatomer Yifrach, that a Tzadik will blossom like a date that could take 70 years till he's like a fully formed Tzadik. Yet, even though different from the kernel of wheat, that is very quick turnaround from the planting and sowing of the kernel of wheat in the ground till when we get the wheat stalks, as opposed to the amount of time it takes between planting a fruit tree and having a fruit tree grow out. Yet, once the apple is ready on the tree, you don't have to do anything else. You don't need the preparation through the 39 different types of labors, because the fruit is immediately ready to eat. Not like the kernel of wheat that you need to grind it, you need to thresh it, you need to bake it, etc., etc. Move on. So from this distinction between grains versus fruits, it's understood. Just like it is in sowing grain, through initially planting with tears. He goes and cries, the one that's carrying the seed. Through that he will have afterwards with song. He will harvest it. He will come along with song when he's carrying his bundles. So in a similar vein, so too it's in the planting and the blossoming of trees, that he's also going to be, initially it's a state of tears and joy afterwards. And the Rebbe says, but the joy will be so much greater. It's in a much greater level. Because the distance between the planting and the growth in the tree is incomparably further than the distance between planting and growth by grain, both quantitatively and qualitatively. Like we mentioned before, by a tree, you plant a seed that has no flavor. Not like planting grain that over there, you're planting a kernel of wheat or a kernel of barley that in itself could have been used in food. And what grows out of it is a tree that carries fruits that are immediately ready to be eaten. not like in grain, that grows forth wheat or barley, that they're not appropriate for human consumption as they are. You need the 39 laborers. Even after he harvested, he already has it in bundles. He's carrying the bundles of wheat. There's still necessary many labors to make it ready for consumption. Like the Gemara says, you would think a person is bringing wheat into the house. Can he chew on wheat? You can't chew on the wheat. And the Alter Rebbe the Torah brings about another thing that's incomparable in the difference that goes through between the planting of the tree versus the fruits on the tree. Specifically, in fruits, there is the idea of delight and enjoyment. In eating things made out of barley, eating even bread made out of wheat, that's a staple. It's not made for enjoyment, whereas fruits are a pleasurable experience. And we know the idea of pleasure and delight, in general, the level of delight. Whenever we talk about the different levels of the soul, the level of delight is incomparably higher in comparison to the levels lower than it. Therefore, the level of delight in the soul powers and also the levels of delight in Al Masal Yoinim is called not just a makif, a transcendent level, but a distant makif. Like the Alter Rebbe explains of the Torah, in the service of neshamas, there's the way they are bound up to the lower level of Gan Eden. Though in general the idea of Gan Eden is the idea of delight and pleasure, still in all, it's called the lower Gan Eden. Between the lower Gan Eden and the higher Gan Eden, there's this pillar through which the neshamas ascend from the lower Gan Eden to the higher Gan Eden. And the purpose of that pillar is to cleanse the person between their experience on the lower level to really appreciate the experience of the higher level. To nullify the image and the visage of the level beneath it, similar to a spiritual pillar that's between this world and Gan Eden, that also functions as cleaning our palate, removing any experience of this world, so to remove the image of this world so we can appreciate the next world appropriately. Last paragraph on this page. This is the reason. Amongst the Yom Tovim themselves. Only Sukkot is a time of our rejoicing. Like it's brought down Yalkut Shemoini. It doesn't say anywhere in the Torah where it speaks about the Yom Tov of Pesach any injunction to be joyful on Pesach. In the Yom Tov of Shavuos, once the idea of joy is mentioned. When it comes to Sukkot, 3 times in different places where the Torah speaks about Sukkot, does it speak about Simcha. How come? Why this difference? Why this disparity? Because on Sukkot is the ultimate quality of the growth, that's accomplished through the ultimate rotting away and the nullification of the seed. Because then it's also a time of the gathering of all the other parts of your crops, including your fruits. So now we're going to connect it back to the 15th of Shvat. According to this will be understood the advantage of the 15th of Shvat, that it's the Rosh Hashanah of the tree. The fact that the end is staked out in the beginning, like we said before, The end of the Mishnah speaks about the Rosh Hashanah of the tree, and the beginning of the Mishnah speaks about the Rosh Hashanah of the kings and the Rosh Hashanah of the Chadashim, of the Regalim, of the Yom Tovim. The connection between the end of the Mishnah about the 15th of Shvat and its beginning, and the first of Nisan being Rosh Hashanah for kings and for Yom Tovim. Because the ultimate bittul appears and is seen in Rosh Hashanah for kings specifically. Because that's the entire being of the king. That is a state of bittul, like we said before. From this comes out also in the pilgrimage festivals. In general, these are the Yom Tovim associated with the grains. Are also in them there's the idea that I planted them for me in the earth. Indicating the level of bittul. But it comes out in a greater revelation on the 15th of Shvat. On the 15th of Shvat, the moon of the month of Shvat is completely full. It's in the middle of the winter season, known in the term of Chazal as Tkufas Tevis, the middle of the winter. The most powerful time of cold and winter. Then in that greatest time, or that most powerful cold, in the fullness of the moon, that's the Rosh Hashanah of the tree. Like we said before, that in Rosh Hashanah, all the details are later on going to come out for the rest of that year, the rest of that month, just like the head includes every life force of the rest of the body. So the same thing, the entire year is included over there in a state of potential, in a concealed way. And the Rosh Hashanah of the trees, including it also the planting and the growth of the trees. That also in the planting there's visible the ultimate bittul, because by trees we plant a seed that has no taste. From that comes about the ultimate joy in the time when we gather it into the home, and the growth of the fruits of and the time when we gather them in the Yom Tov Sukkos, that's the time of our rejoicing. So initially we said that this also is specific to the Jewish people. The idea of the grains and the crops, this is a world matter. It's not only Jews. What's the unique connection with the Jewish people? Also, this has a unique connection with the Jewish people. According to what it says, a man is a tree of the field. It's brought down the Gemara, it's referring to a scholar. When his Torah studies the way it's supposed to be, through that he's a tree that is fruitful in his Torah study. The man being the tree of the field goes on the higher level of the Jewish people, the way they are bound up with Torah, until their being is Torah. And just like it's in the fruits of the tree, that the fruits of the tree is more recognizable, where it says that they sow with tears and with song they will harvest and go on, and they going and crying, and then they carry their bundles with joy. Because now, like we said before, the Mekivish Tzarech Liyas Yigia Rab of Zman Rav maybe a Peter, since there has to be a lot of toil and a lot of time till the fruits come. So therefore, the joy of a fruit tree giving fruit is a lot more greater than the joy of the harvest of the grains and the crops. So too, it's in Torah study. There has to be. You have to toil. You have to toil specifically in Torah, not just study Torah. Through having your gaita, through that you will find the most greatest quality and level.